So it's 10 o'clock. We're here to do a Maple Pecan Bake cook-along today. Again, my name is Tracey Reed. If you're just joining, I'm a nutritional consultant based out of Calgary, and I have a clinical practice. I see people from across Alberta and sometimes elsewhere as well. And so today I'm really excited to be here with the Lung Association to do a cook-along for a recipe called a Maple Pecan Bake. And so we may have people joining in the next couple of minutes. So I'm going to just start by going through the kitchen tools that you'll need if you want to join in and prepare this recipe with me. So I'm going to change the angle of my camera now so you can see some of the things that you'll need. So a cutting board is something that you're definitely going to need. You don't need one quite this big. I have quite a large one here today. So if it's a little bit smaller, that's okay. But you definitely want sort of a medium to large sized cutting board. You will need a good chopping knife. So I have quite a large knife here. You don't need one this big, but I would not choose a small knife today. You will need sort of a medium to large size knife. You will need a teaspoon and a tablespoon measuring spoon. You will need some kind of large spoon to stir with. So I have two options here with me today. I have a wooden spoon and I also have a large metal spoon. So something along those lines would be useful. We will need some minced or grated garlic. So I like to actually use a little micro grater for that. If you don't have one of these, some people have a garlic press. That would be a good option. Or you can also just use your cutting board and your knife to grate that garlic or mince it. And you will need a big bowl, a big mixing bowl. So I have quite a large one here just to be on the safe side, err on the side of caution. But a good medium to large size mixing bowl is going to be really important. And we will also need either a really large baking sheet or I have two smaller ones. So mine are, oh, my doors open, mine are set up behind me. I actually have all my ingredients sitting on them right now. But you'll want to line your baking sheet maybe with a parchment paper. I have silicone mats in mine. And if you don't have a silicone mat or parchment paper, then those would need to be greased. So those are three options for those baking sheets. Now, I've just talked you through all the kitchen tools that you're going to need. So let's have a quick look at the ingredients that you're going to need. So you will need a pound of turkey breast tenders. If you can't find them, I'm using a Winter's turkey breast tender today. You can also use a chicken breast. So those are both good options. I like turkey a little bit better than a chicken breast. It tends to be a bit moister and more tender. So that's why I like to use turkey in this recipe. So a pound of either of those. You will need zucchini. Now, you want about 3 medium zucchini. These ones are actually quite large, so I probably won't use the full quantity I have here, but 3 sort of medium-ish sized zucchini is what you'll need. You'll need some Granny Smith apples or another tart, fairly firm apple would work as well. So maybe something like a Pink Lady or a Honeycrisp. So I have a bunch of green apples. I found a nice bag of them at the grocery store. They're a little on the small side. So 3 Granny Smith apples, but because mine are smaller, I'm probably going to use 4 today. So this is the nice thing about this recipe is that there's quite a bit of versatility in actual quantity. It doesn't really have to be exact. So 3 Granny Smiths. You'll want a cup of pecans. So I have mine measured out already. You will need some avocado oil. I'm pretty picky about avocado oils, and I'm going to tell you why. A lot of avocado oil on the market is rancid, and it develops this very strong avocado-y flavor that is not really desirable with food. And you don't want to be eating rancid oil. It's quite inflammatory. So there's two brands that I like. This one I'm using today, this is a Chosen Foods brand. I also like the Primal Kitchen one. Those are two that I have found to be quite trustworthy. Quality is good, and it has a really nice neutral flavor profile, which is what we really need for today's recipe. You will need some maple syrup. So any maple syrup will do. I have one from a local health food store today. So you'll want that maple syrup. You'll need a clove of garlic. So if you have some garlic on hand, that's great. If you don't happen to have fresh garlic on hand, you could always put in a little bit of garlic powder or granulated garlic. So that's an option. And finally, you'll need some salt. So I have a Himalayan pink salt that I like to use in my cooking. So that's what I have here with me today. But again, any salt will do. So those are the ingredients. So now that you know what you need in your kitchen and you know what the ingredients are, let's get started with some cooking. So we need to get everything chopped up. And actually, before we even begin, we need to start the oven. So set your oven. It's actually a higher temperature that we're going to be cooking with today so that we can lock in all the juiciness of our turkey. So set your oven to 450 degrees. Okay, my oven is started. So we're going to start by chopping up our vegetables. So again, I'm going to change the angle of the screen so that you can see what I'm doing. So let's start with the zucchini. So like I said, my zucchini are quite large today. If I put them next to the knife, you can get a bit of perspective on how big they are. So I bought 3, but I'm actually just going to use the larger 2 because that should suffice. It should equal roughly, if you happen to have a kitchen scale, should equal roughly 750 grams of zucchini. Now I have already washed mine. If you haven't washed yours, then do that quickly. Check that you don't have any stickers on the zucchini. If you do, you want to take those stickers off. I have a little compost bin just off to my side, so I just have it there for convenience. So I'm just taking the ends, trimming the ends off the zucchini, and then I want to have it. And then I'm going to have each of those sections again. So this is a really nice way to cut zucchini because it gives me a flat surface. I don't have to worry about the zucchini rolling. So I'm going to chop each of these. You can see these end up sort of a nice bite-sized piece of zucchini. And once I have those chopped, they just go into that big mixing bowl. So I'm going to talk to you, once we get all of this into the oven, I'm going to actually talk to you about why I've chosen these ingredients and how they benefit the health of your lungs. So we'll have a chance to really look at, whoops, just lost a piece on the floor, that's okay. We'll have a chance to really discuss some of the nutrients in these foods and how those nutrients benefit your lungs. So zucchini is a nice ingredient to use because it's pretty readily available all year round. And it's one that if you're living in Alberta or elsewhere in Canada, it is quite easy to grow in your own garden. So if you're a gardener and you really like fresh produce, this is one that's lovely to grow in your own garden. Okay, so my zucchini is chopped and in the bowl. I'm just going to give everybody a minute to kind of catch up. And the next thing we're going to be chopping up is our apples. So again, the recipe calls for 3 apples. I'm going to be using 4 because my apples are a little bit on the small side today. Now, again, when I'm cutting apples for cooking, I actually cut them differently than I would for eating purposes. And the reason I do that, normally for eating, I would quarter my apple and core it, but I like to have that flat surface to kind of chop from. So I cut off the side, I leave the core intact, and I just continue to cut around the core, and then I'm going to dispose of my core. So again, the reason I like to do that is I like that nice flat surface to be on my cutting board. That way I don't have to worry about my food moving too much, and I don't need to worry about the knife slipping and cutting my fingers. So again, I'm just cutting these into what I would consider to be sort of a nice bite-sized piece. And then once you've got this cut, they can just go right into that mixing bowl with the zucchini. So the reason we're using Granny Smith's or some other tart firm apple is because other apples will cook a little bit faster and become a bit mushy. So we want a nice firm apple, and we want an apple that has that little bit of tartness because this is a savory dish. So we don't really want a very sweet apple. Now, again, living in Alberta or surrounding area, apples are very accessible to us, and we have good access to them year-round. Okay, so I'm on my final one. Again, I'm just using 1 extra today because my apples are a little bit on the small side. So once again, we don't have to be super specific with quantities in this recipe, which is nice. It makes it a little bit more versatile. So again, this is a recipe I'm adapting from a recipe in my upcoming cookbook. So I'm really excited to be sharing it with you today. Okay, so my apples are all chopped up. They're in my bowl. So now I have my chopped zucchini in here, and we have the chopped Granny Smith apples. And so those pieces, again, are sort of bite-sized, maybe about a cubed inch in size. So the next thing I'm going to throw into my bowl is the pecans. Now, I have actually done something with my pecans that you don't need to be doing necessarily today, but I soaked my pecans. So I don't know if you can tell, but they're a little bit swollen, a little bit bigger than a pecan would normally be. And that's because I soaked them overnight in some water. Now, the reason I did that is to make the nutrients more available in these pecans. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but you don't have to have soaked them. It's not necessary. I do this with my nuts for better nutrient availability and absorption. And again, I'll talk a little bit later about why I've done that once we have all of this in the oven. So the cup of pecans is now in the mixing bowl with the zucchini and the apple. And then we want a clove of garlic. So again, if you don't have fresh garlic, then you could always use a little bit of garlic powder or some granulated garlic. So again, there's a variety of ways that you can prepare or mince your garlic. You can cut it right on your cutting board and mince it that way. Or you can use a garlic press. I'm going to be using a micro grater. And so I'll show you what that looks like here on the cutting board. Normally I would do it right into the bowl, but you can see what this is going to look like. So this is a micro grater that you might also use for something like a lemon zest. So I'm just running my garlic across it. I have to be a little bit mindful that I don't get my fingers in there. So I get down to the last little bit and I'm going to discard that. And so this is what it looks like. It's kind of stuck onto the grater there. It hasn't actually fallen onto the cutting board. So now I'm just going to scrape this with my knife into my bowl so that it's added to the rest of the ingredients. So, but any way you want to do that is just fine. So that is the garlic into the bowl. Now I'm going to add salt. This is where I need my 1 teaspoon measuring spoon. And we want a full teaspoon, oops, wrong opening. We want a full teaspoon of salt. So again, I'm using a pink Himalayan salt. A sea salt is a really good option, but any salt you happen to have at home is going to be just fine. So I'm going to sprinkle that over the contents of my bowl. The last thing I need to chop up and add into my bowl is the turkey. Again, oh, my oven is ready. If you aren't using turkey or you have troubles finding a turkey breast tender, which is what I'm using, then chicken breast is just fine. Again, I do prefer to use the turkey tenders. I find them to be a bit moister. So I have 1 pound here. And so we need to chop these up. And again, we're going to chop them into bite-sized pieces. So I bought this turkey frozen, so I had to let it thaw. Sometimes my meat is not 100% thawed, and actually that works just fine. If it's not 100% thawed, still a tiny bit frozen, it actually can be easier to cut. So again, we're just going to chop into bite-sized pieces and add to the contents of our bowl. Got a little bit of sinewy stuff here. I'm just going to discard. Stuck to my finger. It doesn't want to come off. So it's important to have a nice sharp knife for cooking. You are much more likely to injure yourself with a dull knife. So it's actually much safer to cook with a sharp knife. And you can buy, little sharpening devices for home use that are inexpensive and can help you to keep your knives sharp. Oops. So again, we're just cutting up some turkey breast tenders to go into our mixing bowl. Okay, so I have those in my mixing bowl. And at this point, I'm actually going to remove, we don't need the cutting board or the knife anymore. So I'm going to remove these. Those are in my sink now. And so you should have now your zucchini, your apple, your pecans, your turkey, your garlic, and your salt all in a mixing bowl. This is where we add in some avocado oil and maple syrup. So you will need a tablespoon measuring spoon for this part. We're going to add 3 tablespoons of the avocado oil. So we'll just drizzle that over. That's my first tablespoon. Here's number 2. And number 3. So that's the avocado oil. And then we just want a tablespoon of maple syrup. So this is going to help bring out the natural sweetness in the pecans and the apple. So I find maple syrup is a nice sweetener. Again, I'll talk a little bit more once we have everything in the oven about some of the benefits of these ingredients. So the next thing you're going to need is a large spoon. Again, it could be a wooden spoon, it could be a stainless steel spoon, anything that's large. I'm going to use the stainless steel spoon because I find it's a bit easier. And so we just want to give all of this a really nice good mix. We want to coat all the pieces in avocado oil, in the maple syrup, and get the salt and the garlic nicely distributed through all of these ingredients. So I love these, I love recipes where you're really only using a few dishes to prepare. So today it's really going to be this big mixing bowl and then either a really large baking sheet or a couple of smaller ones. So there's really great recipes that use one pot or one baking sheet. And it's just really nice to minimize the amount of dishes you have to wash. So I have that well mixed now. And so I'm going to bring over, I'm using 2 baking sheets. So this is my baking sheet. I like to use ones with rims on them, then I don't need to worry about food falling off, but it doesn't have to have a rim on it. And so I have mine lined with a silicone mat today. You can also use parchment paper in there, or you can grease your baking sheet. And so you can grease that with more of the avocado oil, or if you have butter or coconut oil or bacon fat or whatever you have in your fridge or in your cupboard is going to be suitable. So because I'm using 2 smaller sheets, I'm going to divide the contents of the bowl equally between the 2, or roughly equally. So that's going to be spread out on here. So you want to spread things out so you don't have a double layer of ingredients, just to ensure even cooking. So there's my first pan. And here is my second one. So again, you can definitely just use one pan if you have a nice large one. And just again, make sure everything's spread out. We don't want a double layer. We don't want stuff stacked on top of each other because that is just going to prevent even cooking. Okay, so I've got everything spread out. My oven is ready to go. So I'm going to get these in the oven now. So I have 2 racks set up in my oven so that I can fit both of those trays in. And I'm just checking cooking time. So this needs to bake for 20 to 25 minutes. So I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes. If you haven't quite got everything into your oven yet, don't worry. I am going to just talk to you now about the ingredients that I chose, why they are good for lung health, and so how they can really benefit you if you have a lung condition. So I'll start with the turkey. So turkey is a good source of zinc. All meat and seafood is. And zinc is a really important nutrient when we're talking about lung health because it supports our immune system, and that is really important when we're looking at lung conditions. And it actually also supports respiratory health. So zinc is one of those nutrients that is really important to get. We also see that turkey is a good source of selenium. And selenium is another important nutrient for immune support, for immune function. Now, because turkey is a meat and is a good source of protein, it will have, when protein breaks down and gets digested, it digests into something called amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks that we need for our body tissue, and that includes lung tissue. So amino acids help, again, they're the building blocks, so they're going to help with lung repair, or repair really anywhere in the body for that matter. And so lungs are considered to be one of the barrier tissues in our body. Other barrier tissues are our skin, right? This protects us from the outside world. Our lungs protect us from anything that we breathe in. Our GI tract is another barrier tissue. And so the health of barrier tissue, again, because your lungs are a barrier tissue, is really important. So getting good quality protein is really, really important to support that barrier tissue. So that's the turkey. The zucchini in this recipe, it has a few different interesting health benefits. So zucchini has actually been researched and been shown to be antihistaminic. And so I'm sure you've all heard of antihistamines. When people have allergies, they'll take an antihistamine. So zucchini has some of this antihistaminic property to it. So why is that important for lung conditions? Well, when we look at lung conditions, there is quite a bit of research literature supporting that many lung conditions, things like asthma or COPD, that there is or can be a histamine correlation to those. So it's a little bit different from an allergy pathway, but histamine can definitely be impacting your lung condition. So zucchini is antihistaminic. So that's really great. Zucchini is also anti-inflammatory. And this is one thing that all lung conditions have in common is inflammation. So we want to help to bring down that inflammation. So zucchini is going to help to do that. Thirdly, zucchini is a source of folate. So it's not one of our best sources, but it does contain some folate. Good sources of folate are anything green. So those leafy greens, things like chard, kale, spinach, all of those greens are a good source of folate. And folate is really, really important when we talk about oxygen transport. So you really want to maximize your oxygen transport when you have a lung condition. So zucchini does have some folate to do that. So it's anti-inflammatory, antihistaminic, and contains some folate. So zucchini is going to be a nice addition, and that's why I'm using it in this recipe. The apples contain something called quercetin. And so quercetin has actually a lot of really interesting benefits. So like the zucchini, it's antihistaminic. It stabilizes some cells in the body called mast cells. And mast cells are involved with are often involved with the lung inflammation. So we want to kind of try to inhibit those cells, and quercetin helps to do that. Quercetin also helps with something called tight junction. So again, this goes back, I talked about barrier function a little bit earlier, and quercetin helps to ensure that that barrier function is really good and the cells are tight and creating this nice barrier. So that's why I've used apples in this recipe. Now, the original recipe that will be in my upcoming cookbook called Histamine Haven, the original recipe uses plantains. And I love cooking with plantains, not a really common ingredient used in North American cooking for sure. And so that's one of the reasons I swapped out the plantains, because they are a little bit more difficult to find. But if you're making this recipe, if you enjoy this recipe and you happen to be out shopping and you see some plantains, I know Superstore always has them, then give it a try with plantains instead of the apples. But the apples are a really good addition from a lung perspective because they are so rich in the quercetin. The plantains are also good, but for a very different reason. Plantains contain something called resistant starch. And resistant starch, oh, sorry, I've neglected the chat. There's a question in the chat. Could you use extra virgin olive oil in the recipe in a pinch? You could. I don't particularly like the flavor profile of olive oil with this recipe. So that's one of the reasons I like to use an avocado oil. And there's a little bit of controversy about using, especially an extra virgin olive oil for high heat cooking. So I don't like to use olive oil for high heat cooking because it might be creating some oxidative damage to the fat, to the oil. And when we have oxidative damage to our oils, then they become inflammatory. So my preference is definitely to use an avocado oil. If you don't have an avocado oil, some other substitutions that would be less inflammatory would be, if you've got some bacon fat saved in your fridge, or if you have lard. I love to cook with duck fat, so that would be another nice option that I really love with roasted foods. So sorry, I missed that. That came in a few minutes ago. So anyways, back to the plantains. The plantains are really rich in something called resistant starch, which feeds the good microbes in your gut microbiome. And there's really interesting research showing potential for something called the gut-lung axis, where if we can restore the health of the gut, we can improve the health of our lung function. So that is, plantains are really good via that gut-lung connection. So whether you're using apples or whether you're using plantains in this recipe, they're both really great options. Now I'm going to talk to you about the pecans. So the pecans are really rich in minerals, and we've already talked about zinc in the turkey. Pecans are another really good source of zinc. And so this is one of the reasons, actually, I had told you earlier that I soak my nuts before I use them. And so I did soak my pecans. You don't have to do it, but soaking is going to make those minerals more available so that you can actually absorb them and use them. And so nuts contain something called phytates, and the phytates bind to the minerals. And once they're bound, then we can't actually absorb them. And so even though nuts are excellent sources of minerals, we can't always actually digest and absorb them. So a really simple technique to utilize and get the benefits of all of those minerals is to soak them. So I started mine soaking last night right before I went to bed. I just put them in some nice filtered water. I put a little pinch of salt in there, and I just let them sit on my counter overnight. So nothing too fancy there. And then this morning, I just strained them through a sieve. So I just drained off that water. Now my pecans aren't going to be as crunchy as if I hadn't soaked them. They'll be a little bit softer. Now I don't mind that texture, and actually, as you can see, I'm in braces right now, so that works out a little bit better having braces. And I have some jaw issues, so having softer food is helpful there. So I'm in braces in preparation for some jaw surgery. So next ingredient that I want to talk to you about is the garlic. And we only used 1 clove in here. You could definitely add more if you wanted to, but garlic is just an amazing, amazing food. Besides the lovely flavor that it imparts to so many dishes, it is antifungal and antiviral and antibacterial. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. So Nina asks, I just like using fruit in a meal. Is there an alternative? So if you don't like using the apples in this dish, I would actually encourage you to try using the plantains. Plantains are quite different in flavor profile from a banana. If you've never eaten plantains before, I would compare it more to almost like a sweet potato. And so I really like to use plantains. Again, they have this excellent source of resistant starch. You could also just use more zucchini. So just swap out the apple for the zucchini in this, and that's going to work out fine too. You have to be a little bit careful when you start swapping ingredients out, because the cooking time of different ingredients is going to vary. So I've chosen ingredients in this recipe where the cooking time is going to be similar for all of them. You wouldn't, for example, want to put, say, maybe a carrot or a sweet potato in here, because those will require longer cooking times. So Nina, I hope that answers that question. Oh, fruit with meat. Okay, so don't like that fruit, fruit and meat combination. Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, just use more zucchini if that's the case there. Okay, so again, the garlic is great antifungal, antiviral, antibacterial. It just has so many great properties. But when we're looking at lung health in particular, again, garlic has this quercetin that is going to be great for lungs. It's going to help with barrier function. And also quercetin has this antihistaminic sort of mast stabilizing property. So the avocado oil is one of the anti-inflammatory oils. And we need to be really, really careful with the fats that we're consuming, because many, many fats are inflammatory. And we don't want to be contributing to the inflammation in our lungs. We want to be reducing that. So it's really important that we use anti-inflammatory fats. So let me start by sort of summarizing some of the fats that you don't want to be using in your kitchen. You don't want canola oil. You don't want corn oil. You don't want sunflower seed oil. You don't want a grapeseed oil. You wouldn't want a peanut oil or a soybean oil. Those are all going to be inflammatory oils. So if you have those in your cupboard, I would encourage you to get rid of those ones and then replace those with Avocado oil is great for cooking. Coconut oil is also great for cooking with. Butter is good for cooking with, but because butter still has some dairy protein in it, it can burn. So it's not the butter, it's not the fat that's burning, it's those dairy proteins. You can use a clarified butter that will work really, really well and not have that same propensity towards burning. So all of those fats are excellent for cooking with because they're very heat stable and they will not oxidize with heat. And again, oxidized fats are going to perpetuate inflammation in your lungs. So those are all good fats for cooking with, for raw, for use in salads. Olive oil is brilliant. Avocado oil also works very, very well in salads or for raw foods. So if you are drizzling oils onto your food or for salad use, again, olive oil and avocado oil are going to be great. Those are both monounsaturated fats that are anti-inflammatory. So that was quite a lot of information on fats, but that is why we're using avocado oil in this recipe, because it's anti-inflammatory and has those beneficial properties. So we used a little bit of maple syrup. So let me talk to you a bit now about the maple syrup. So maple syrup is what we consider to be a nutritive sweetener. It still has some nutrients associated with it. Sugar, processed white sugar, doesn't. So it is non-nutritive. And in fact, table sugar, or the white sugar that we use in baking, is actually considered to be an anti-nutrient because when we eat that sugar, when we process that sugar, we actually have to use nutrients to process that. So whether we're pulling that from our body tissue or taking that from the food that we're ingesting, sugar actually needs nutrients to metabolize it. So not really an ideal situation. One of the things that sugar causes a really significant loss of is magnesium. It utilizes a lot of magnesium to just process that sugar. So magnesium is a really, really important nutrient for overall health. So we want to make sure that we're sweetening our food, if we're going to sweeten it at all, with these nutritive sweeteners. So maple syrup is one of those. And one of the nutrients that it has in it is zinc. And we've already touched on zinc several times in our ingredient list today. So this is why I like to use maple syrup if I want just that subtle little bit of sweetness. Another really nice option is honey, but I don't actually like to use honey when I'm doing a high heat type of cooking, because raw honey has some really beautiful enzymes in it that benefit us, and those get destroyed with heat. I want to talk to you a little bit. My oven still has a few minutes, 3 minutes left to go. I want to talk to you about some possible add-ins that you could use to enhance the flavor. So let me just pull these out of my cupboard. You could add in a little bit of onion powder. I buy mine in bulk, so I have it in this jar. This is actually a granulated onion, so that would be something that can add a bit more to the flavor profile. But there's something that has a bit of an oniony flavor to it that is a very, very powerful antihistaminic seasoning, and it's called nigella seed. Now, in my original recipe, it utilizes this, but I didn't use it today because it's a little bit difficult to find. I got this one from a health food store in Canada called Amaranth. It's really, really neat. I'm going to show you what it looks like here. So it looks a little bit like black sesame seeds. And it is sometimes also called black cumin. But the true name is nigella seed or black nigella. And so I don't use this whole, I grind it. And again, it lends a little bit of an oniony kind of flavor to it. but this has been really, really well researched for its antihistaminic properties. If you decide this is something you want to try, check out your local stores. Like I said, pretty hard to find. You will likely have to kind of visit a health food store or maybe an Indian market. And then you need to grind this. So there's a couple ways to do that. If you have a mortar and pestle, you can grind it in there. I have a little spice grinder that works really, really well to grind this. And then when it goes onto the baking sheet, I just sprinkle it over. So I just wanted to share that with you, so you know that you do have a few additional options if you want to enhance the flavor profile. So I've talked a lot about the nutrients in all these foods, and it's just really nutrient dense food is really, really important for lung health. And so this recipe, again, is a really nutrient dense meal that's easy to cook. There goes my timer. So let's pull this out and see what it looks like. Your oven, you may still need another 5 minutes or so. So my oven tends to run a little bit high. So that's why I cooked on the lower end. Okay, so I just pulled this out. Here's what the finished product looks like. So my apples are soft, but they still have some firmness to them. And the turkey's done. And the turkey's the key ingredient really for looking for doneness, because you want that turkey to be cooked all the way through. I'm just grabbing my meat thermometer, and I'm going to insert it into one of these bigger pieces here. So with poultry, you want, oh, this is definitely done. With poultry, you want the temperature to be 165 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. That's 74 in Celsius. So you definitely want to make sure that your meat is done. Should be just a little bit browned. You don't want to overcook it because it's going to dry out that meat. So we've got some nice tender zucchini, some apple that's also become tender. Our meat's going to be nice and juicy. And then the pecans just add a really nice texture variety and a flavor profile. And that little bit of maple syrup is just going to have sort of enhance the flavors. So it's now ready to eat. Should turn my oven off. This meal is really, like I said, it's a one sheet pan meal. So you've got everything you need. This meal should feed 4 people, and you've got, it's the like the one shot deal, one pan meal. So if you're not going to eat this for your lunch today, I hope you will, then it does freeze quite well. So if you want to save some for tomorrow and have leftovers tomorrow, that's a really nice option. But you can also freeze these and then pull them out of the freezer and just pop it back in the oven to heat it up. Or you can warm it up in your microwave as well. But this is a really nice versatile dish that makes great leftovers as well. So I hope you've enjoyed today's cook along with the Lung Association. Again, my name is Tracey Reed, nutritional consultant here in Calgary, but see people all across Alberta. I hope you enjoy this meal as much as my family and I do. So that's it for today. Have a great day and happy eating. Bye-bye.